This plane crashed less than 1 minute after takeoff, and everyone blamed the pilots. But what if I told you they did everything right? That one line changed everything. What happened inside this Boeing 787? Was it a glitch? A sensor failure? Or a software bug nobody saw coming? From uncommanded fuel cutoffs to emergency turbines flying out midair, we're diving into 8 shocking reasons why this crash was not the pilot's fault. Let's kick things off with the cockpit moment that changed everything and proves the plane stopped listening to the pilots. Right before the crash of Air India Flight 171, something really strange happened in the cockpit. The 2 pilots were having a quick conversation, and one of them asked the other, "Why did you cut off?" The second pilot immediately replied, "I didn't." This short exchange might seem small at first, but it actually tells us something huge. The fuel switches, which are used to control fuel flow to the engines, might have switched off by themselves. That's a big deal. On a modern aircraft like the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, everything is designed to follow the pilot's instructions. The plane is full of smart systems, but none of them are supposed to act on their own when it comes to major decisions like cutting off fuel to both engines. The only people who are supposed to control the fuel switches are the pilots. But in this case, it looks like the system itself shut off the fuel, even though neither pilot told it to. And right after that, the plane crashed less than a minute after takeoff. That's why this wasn't just some minor misunderstanding between the 2 pilots. This was something way more serious. It suggests that there was an uncommanded shutdown, a situation where the aircraft does something on its own without the pilots telling it to. Think about how dangerous that is. Imagine you're driving a car and suddenly your engine shuts off, even though your foot is still on the gas. You didn't press anything, but the car just gives up. That's basically what happened to Flight 171, except in the air. But it gets even scarier when you hear what was already wrong with the plane before it even took off. Before the crash even happened, there was already a known issue with the aircraft. On the flight just before the crash, from Delhi to Ahmedabad, one of the pilots reported a problem with something called the stabilizer position transducer. That might sound super technical, but it's actually just a sensor that helps the plane know what angle its nose is pointing, up or down. It sends this information to the flight control computer so that the plane can respond smoothly when the pilot moves the controls. If this sensor gives the wrong information, the plane can start doing things it's not supposed to, like pitching up too much or down too much. Worse, if the computer thinks the aircraft is in a wrong position, even though it's actually fine,
it might start correcting things that don't need to be corrected. And in this case, that might include sending signals to cut off the fuel supply. The pilot who flew the previous leg wrote about the defect in the technical log, which is like a diary for the aircraft where every little issue is recorded. Engineers checked it and followed Boeing's guide for fixing it. But just because the guide was followed doesn't mean the problem was completely fixed. Sometimes, sensors can act up again later, especially if the issue is internal or linked to deeper software problems. And this wasn't just a one-time glitch. The jet had a long list of failures you won't believe. When we look at Air India Flight 171, it's easy to think that this was a one-time accident, but that's not true. The exact same aircraft had faced several electrical and software problems before it ever crashed. This wasn't some random unlucky event. It was a tragedy waiting to happen. The warning signs were already there. They just weren't taken seriously. Let's start with something that happened months before the crash on December 12, 2024. The same plane, flying the same route from Ahmedabad to London, had to cancel its flight due to what they called an unresolvable electrical snag. That means something in the plane's electrical system was broken so badly that engineers couldn't even fix it on the spot. They had to send all the passengers back home and keep the aircraft grounded until the next day, when it finally took off after heavy repairs. Now fast forward to a few weeks before the actual crash. This same plane had a false warning appear on its display panel. It said there was a problem in the fuel system, but when engineers checked, it turned out to be a fake alert. There was nothing wrong with the fuel system at that time. So what does that mean? It means the plane was showing fake errors, which is almost worse than real ones. Because when a plane cries wolf like that, people may start ignoring the warnings, thinking it's just another bug. When you put all these things together, an electrical fault that couldn't be fixed quickly, and warning messages that turned out to be false, it paints a scary picture. This plane wasn't just having bad luck. It was suffering from a pattern of failures. Airplanes are full of sensors, wires, and computer software. And when these systems start acting up again and again, it's not just bad luck, it's neglect. It's a warning that something big is going to go wrong. If a fuel system shows a fake warning one week and then completely shuts off the next, maybe it's because the system was already messed up and nobody noticed the real danger hiding behind the fake alert. But even the black box can't tell the full story. Here's where everyone is making a huge mistake. When people hear that a plane's black box showed the fuel switches were in the cutoff position, they immediately think the pilots made a mistake. But it's not that simple. The black box, also known as the Flight Data Recorder, or FDR, doesn't actually record every single detail like a camera. It only captures electrical signals. That means it knows what happened, but not how or why it happened. Let me explain in a simpler way.
Imagine you're using WhatsApp, and one day your phone sends a weird message to someone. You know you didn't send it. Maybe your phone glitched or someone else used it, but now people think it was you just because the message came from your account. That's kind of what happened with Flight 171. The FDR recorded that the fuel switches moved to the cutoff position, which stopped fuel from reaching the engines. But it can't say whether a pilot physically moved those switches or if a computer glitch or a faulty signal made it happen. It just logs the result, that the switch was off. That's it.
So when people say the pilots turned off the engines, they're making an assumption. The truth is, we don't know for sure. And when lives are at stake, we can't afford to make assumptions. We need to know the full picture. Because there are many ways those switches could have been flipped without pilot input. Maybe a bug in the software, maybe a failed sensor, maybe even an electrical surge. Still think it was human error? Wait until you meet the one system that may have shut everything down. There's a really important system in modern airplanes called FADEC. That stands for Full Authority Digital Engine Control. But in simple words, FADEC is like the brain of the aircraft engines. It handles everything: how much fuel goes in, how fast the engine spins, and even when to shut the engine down if something's not right. Pilots still fly the plane, but FADEC is doing a lot of the behind-the-scenes work. FADEC relies on tons of data from different sensors placed all over the aircraft. These sensors constantly tell FADEC things like temperature, pressure, position, and more. FADEC then makes decisions based on this information. Normally, that makes flying super safe. But here's the problem. What happens when the information FADEC gets is wrong? That's exactly what may have happened on AI 171. If one of the sensors, like the stabilizer sensor, which was already reported faulty earlier, sent bad information, FADEC might have thought the engines were in danger. And when it thinks there's a threat, it can react fast, sometimes faster than humans. In this case, it could have cut off the fuel flow to the engines to protect them, even though there wasn't really a threat. So the engines didn't fail on their own, and the pilots didn't shut them down either. It might have been FADEC acting on incorrect info. Basically, the engines followed the commands of a confused brain, a brain that thought it was doing the right thing. And there's something else. FADEC has a feature that automatically tries to restart the engines if they fail. That's called auto relight. But if the fuel switches are set to cut off, the auto relight doesn't even start. There's no fuel to restart with. It's like trying to turn on a car that has no gas in the tank. And just when things couldn't get worse, the plane lost all power in midair. This next part is insane.
Here's one of the scariest parts of the entire Air India 171 crash. The RAT was deployed. No, not an actual rat. RAT stands for Ram Air Turbine. It's a small emergency device that drops down from the aircraft and spins using wind. It creates backup power when everything else fails. The thing is, RAT only comes out when the plane loses almost all electrical power. That means something serious went wrong very fast. And we're not talking about a flickering light or one broken screen. We're talking about a total or near total power failure.
That's what made the RAT pop out. The aircraft lost so much power after takeoff that emergency systems had to step in just to keep the plane alive. This is a major red flag. For a Boeing 787, a super high-tech plane, to lose that much power within seconds of takeoff is not normal. It's not supposed to happen, ever. So what could cause this? Experts say it could be a massive electrical failure, a glitch in the flight software, or even a short circuit in one of the key systems. Whatever it was, it shut down critical systems very suddenly.
The worst part? With no power, there's no fuel control. That means even if the pilots wanted to relight the engines, they couldn't. The auto-relight system doesn't work without fuel, and you can't send fuel without electricity. It was a terrible chain reaction. One thing failed and everything else followed. It's like knocking over the first domino. The rest just collapse one by one.
But this wasn't the first time this plane failed. Let's go back to 2015 and uncover the hidden red flag. To understand why the crash of AI-171 wasn't a pilot error, we need to look way back, all the way to 2015. That's when this same plane had already faced a major issue. It had to make an emergency landing because of something called a cabin air compressor surge. This isn't just a random mechanical term, it's a serious problem. The cabin air compressor is what controls the air that flows inside the aircraft. If it malfunctions, the pressure in the cabin can drop or spike suddenly, making it dangerous for both passengers and crew. And guess what? This wasn't some new, unheard-of defect. The CAC surge was already a known issue in the Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner series. Other aircraft in the series had faced similar problems before. So the fact that this plane had such a failure all the way back in 2015 shows us that it wasn't perfect. In fact, it had already shown signs that parts of its system were not reliable. Why does this matter now? Because when an aircraft has repeated technical failures over the years, whether it's the engine, electrical system, air compressor, or fuel controls,
It points to something much bigger. It's not just one part breaking. It's the whole system slowly falling apart. And that's what we call systemic decay, where the entire aircraft is slowly becoming less safe due to multiple weak points. So when people say, it was probably the pilot's mistake, they're not looking at the full picture. The June 12th crash wasn't a one-time accident that came out of nowhere. It was the final result of a pattern of failures that had been happening for years. This same aircraft had already shown signs of weakness in 2015, in 2024, and again just weeks before the crash. And now, the biggest twist of all, the pilots did everything right. Here's how they fought till the very end. Let's now talk about the most important point. The pilots did everything right. In the aftermath of the crash, a lot of people quickly started blaming the pilots. But when you actually look at the data from the black box and the wreckage, you'll see something very different. The actions taken by the pilots were completely by the book. That means they followed all the standard procedures exactly how they were trained to do. Here's what we know. First, when the plane reached VR speed, that's the speed where it's safe to lift off, the pilots pulled the yoke back like they were supposed to. Then, they adjusted the flaps and thrust levers correctly to help the plane climb smoothly. All of these are basic takeoff steps, and they were done perfectly. But then, the fuel switches suddenly moved to cutoff mode. That means the engine stopped getting fuel, which is like turning off a car engine while it's going uphill. That's when things started to go wrong, and fast. But instead of panicking, the pilots stayed focused and reacted immediately. They noticed what happened and tried to flip the fuel switches back to run to get the engines working again. They didn't stop there. They also tried to relight the engines, something that pilots are trained to do in an emergency. This isn't an easy thing to do, especially when the plane is losing altitude fast. Despite the chaos, the pilots tried their best to recover the engines and regain control of the aircraft. And the cockpit voice recording gives us one more important clue. Even in that terrifying moment, they were calm and alert. They were working as a team to solve the problem. There were no signs of panic, confusion, or delay. Every move they made was professional and according to safety protocols. Sadly, the plane didn't give them a chance. The systems they relied on had already failed. No matter how skilled or fast the pilots were, there just wasn't enough time, altitude, or engine power left to save